6 programmes presented by Tony Arthur. Programme 6, The Art of the Storyteller.
Over the last few weeks, we've been taking a look at certain types of British and Irish folk tale, and some of the beliefs and ideas that have helped to shape them. As we've seen, there's still a thriving oral tradition, but its form and content have changed enormously in the 20th century. Gradually, the epic saga of legendary heroes like Finn MacColl and Ossian have gone out of fashion, along with the kind of wonder tales, or märchen as they're called, that were popularised by the Brothers Grimm. Today, the storyteller's repertoire is more likely to contain jokes, shaggy dog stories, and legends that are set in modern industrial cities. Of course, there are pockets of resistance to these changes, but they're usually on the fringes of society, either geographically, as in the west of Ireland, or socially, as with the gypsies or travelling people. Here, the old stories are still to be heard, told in the traditional way, but they're becoming rarer year by year. For most of us, however, trying to tell a traditional tale is like attempting to brew a pot of tea without the tea leaves. We haven't got the necessary ingredients. You can't just conjure up ideas out of thin air. You have to have been brought up in a storytelling environment. You have to have soaked up the repetitions, the formulas, the stock phrases, the plots and counterplots. Then you can rearrange them and stamp your own personality on your traditional legacy. Then people might well sit at your feet on a winter's night and be transported on wild, fantastic adventures, or laugh or shiver at a local tale of trickery or the supernatural. That's if you've studied your art well.
Oh, there is such a thing as a storyteller, and there's such a thing as somebody chancing their arm on stories. Oh, yes. And the good storyteller, it doesn't matter, you've only to give him the bones of some story, and he'll make it a full-length story. And it'll get more interesting each time you hear it, because he's getting more practice telling it, and he's adding in these little bits of his own, which are not premeditated stuff. It just happens on the spur of the moment. You know, that he'll think of something entirely different to what he said last night or yesterday, and then it makes it more interesting and, well, more easily listened to.
Oh gosh, yes, the stories were part of life. Probably maybe the man or woman telling the story would be rather shy, and their memory was so fantastic that they never had to look around when they were talking. They stared continually at one certain spot on the floor or on the wall, or staring at a plate on the dresser, you know, or probably at the lamp. And they never had to move their eyes or anything, and just sitting there staring at the floor with only their lips moving. No hands moving, no head, no nothing. They were like gateposts. They made you part of what they were doing. They brought you in, and it was up to you then if you wanted to drink in the story, fair enough, and if you didn't, well, they'd done their part.
Packy Byrne's description of the Donegal storytellers that he listened to as a boy in the 1920s. Quite a few of the remaining traditional performers adopt this introverted style of delivery, and as Packy said, they prefer to draw the audience into them rather than them having to go out and grab the listener. The delivery becomes almost hypnotic and sort of washes over you.
She returned to the sea, and every day the two children would go down to the shore, where she'd comb their hair and wash their faces. But she couldn't take them off with her. She was very troubled because of that, but they couldn't swim. She lived in the deep and came up every day to attend to the children. The poor husband went to the shore to try to get her back, but sure he wasn't able.
Storytelling styles are, of course, as varied and as individual as the storytellers themselves. For every quiet, majestically paced tale, there'll be another that rushes along like a runaway steam train, not very subtle, but rattling and roaring and showering the audience with sparks of enthusiastic rhetoric. Here's Colm Kane from Connemara, way over on the Atlantic coast of Ireland. His obvious enjoyment of the Gallic tale of the old hag spinning flax transcends language. It's a sexy, jokey canterfable. That's a song and story combined. And Colum swoops between the two with such ease that it's often difficult to distinguish whether he's speaking or singing.
Ora clished the chluish, she the monsoon, the Cecilia was who was the
Colum Kane's enthusiasm is also typical of the tinkers or travellers from Scotland, who themselves frequently adopt a very extrovert style. When the story warrants it, they turn in a really theatrical performance, complete with facial expressions and much waving of arms and hands, and using a variety of vocal changes in tone, pitch and pace, covering the whole range of emotional possibilities. One of the finest of these traveller tradition bearers is Duncan Williamson, born in Argyll. Now just imagine you're with him in his tent on a rainy afternoon as he acts out his story of the moneylender. The traveller's traditional hero, Jack, is falsely accused of robbing an old moneylender and is on the scaffold waiting to be hanged. When asked if he has a last request, Jack begs to be allowed to play just one last tune on his fiddle.
Now all the people who come to see him hung, the provost, the Lord Provost, and all the people around the country come to see Jack and hung. The sheriff, the high sheriff, and all these people. There were dogs and people and children and women, all come to see Jack and hung in their court for robbing an old man in the King's Highway. Everybody was there. It was like a Sunday school gathering. And Jack took the fiddle, and he took the bow across, and he started to play. And the minute they started to play, they started to dance. And the faster they danced, the faster Jack played. And he danced and he played and he played and he played and he played and he played. The dogs and the cats were dancing, even the pigeons that landed. The pigeons was going up on two legs dancing, even the pigeons were dancing. And the cats were dancing, the dogs was tumbling over head over tail. And he's fiddling, and the faster he fiddled, the faster he danced. The dogs, the cats, the pigeons, and even the blackbirds were out there dancing up and down. Till the provost come, and his tongue hung out faster than mine. Stop. No, Jack wouldn't stop. He's going, play the fiddle. Stop. And you see the moneylender, he was there too. And the moneylender dancing, till there were not a stitch in the moneylender, he was in the nude. There were no cleys left on him. He was dancing the nude, the moneylender. And the moneylender laid his thing, and his tongue was out like that, and he's going, stop. Jack was still going with the fiddle. And the Lord Provost come up, he said to Jack, stop your fiddling. I pardon you. I give you life if you stop your fiddling. Jack stopped his fiddling.
If you missed a couple of the words in Duncan Williamson's story, I'm sure you caught his enthusiasm. But entertaining as many of the traveller's stories undoubtedly are, they quite often serve an additional purpose, as parables, preparing young folk for life in a generally hostile society, in which the traveller, like Jack in the tales, has to be clever and shrewd and capable of extricating himself from tricky situations with his natural cunning and quick wit. I wonder just how long gypsies, travellers and tinkers can go on telling stories of this kind. I shouldn't think it would be many years before they're swamped by radio, television and the pre-packaged culture that the rest of us are supposed to enjoy. When this happens, we may well have reached the end of an era. Listen to the effect that the wonderful radio had on the childhood of Brian McMahon.
Every night it was our custom in Friary Lane to gather into Tommyo's to talk. A Tommyo was as old as an eagle. He was stone blind into the bargain, and he was also as cross as the bees. But we were inclined to overlook his crossness, especially when he bought the wonderful radio. Now, before the radio arrived, our only way of passing the nights was listening to Pather Feeney telling stories of Ireland long ago. Well, Pather was old too, all proper crow and close he was, but his stories had the authenticity of immemorial age. We made him tell them over and over again, until he could speak no more for want of spittle. And even today, I am occasionally horrified to find myself flattening hills and mountains with iron buttocks and draining rivers with Dennis of the Drought. Those were the characters in the stories we heard from Father Feeney and Tommyo's thatched cottage long ago. I remember well the night the man came to install the radio. Old Father listened in stupefaction for a minute or two, and then, without speaking, he rose up and went out the door. And at the doorpost, he looked back at the ring of bewitched neighbours, a strange, final glance of malevolence and dignity, sorrow, pride and enmity. And small as I was on my stool under the cavernous chimney, I had the good grace to appreciate that I'd been witness to the end of an epoch. Well, after that, Father never came near Tommyo's any more. In God's gospel, but we didn't miss the man. Sure hadn't we our wonderful, versatile radio?
It's easy to say, oh yes, it's the radio or the TV or quadraphonic sensorama that's destroying storytelling, but it's much more complex than that. For a start, none of these things has actually killed the art. For as we've seen, people still do tell stories. What is rapidly disappearing is the style of story and storytelling that reflected a particular time and way of life. A time when families and neighbours got together on long winter evenings to make their own amusement. Then it didn't matter if a tale took an hour, 2 hours, or 3 nights in the telling. There was nothing else to do anyway, and nowhere to go. Nowadays, people either go out for the evening, or, more than likely, they stay at home and watch the television. And the adventures that both young and old once imagined in the glowing coals of the cottage hearth are now played out for them on the little screen that dominates the sitting room. The world's in a rush. Social habits have changed. We now only have time for the joke on the train or the anecdote across the office desk. And it seems there's less and less place for the old art of storytelling in our lives. And I personally feel that it's a shame, but perhaps I'm just an old romantic. And being a romantic, I'm always pleased to find a story that has survived the ravages of time. And one of my favourites is Appley and Orangey. Folktale scholars seem to have taken a bit of the romance out of it by referring to it as type 720, my mother slew me, my father ate me. But the folk themselves call it, amongst other things, the juniper tree, Appley and Orangey, salt and pepper, waxy candles, and Rosie. It's been collected in virtually every country in Europe, and here we've put 3 British versions together. Isabel Sutherland from Scotland, with her gentle, intimate style, starts the story. Jasper Smith, the Kent gypsy, gives a very matter-of-fact interpretation, as if that sort of thing happens every day in Kent. And then Ruth Tongue from Somerset livens up the proceedings with a touch of theatrical histrionics. It's the tale of a little girl who's killed by her stepmother, then cooked and served up in a stew or pie. The girl eventually gets her own back on the stepmother. So don't forget, in the following montage, Appley and Rosie are the same little girl.
There was a widow